Welcome everyone to the webinar today. The webinar today will last around 45 minutes with reserved time for Q&A at the end. You can ask a question at any time during the presentation. Please submit your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The chat has been deactivated. I would like to now turn it over to Christine with Discus.
Thank you, Rosalinda. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Christine Locascio. I'm the Chief of Policy, Strategy, and Membership with the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, or as we're known around town, Discus. Welcome to the webinar entitled Pouring Over Spirits Tariffs, the Ripple Effect on U.S. Hospitality Sectors. And we have a great panel here today to help us understand the issue of tariffs on spirits, and the ramifications beyond spirits producers. Now, before we dive in, I want to reiterate that our industry fully understands and supports the administration's goal of job creation and manufacturing in the United States and in securing fair and reciprocal trade for U.S. companies. So we fully support efforts to expand job creation and fair trade for spirits in the United States. Spirits are unique for a variety of reasons, and we have a really fantastic panel here today to help us understand all of this and how spirits fit within the really amazing and dynamic hospitality sector in the United States. First, we'll be joined by my colleague Rob Marin, who is the Senior Vice President for International Trade and Market Access at Discus, who will set the scene by giving an overview of where we are right now on tariffs and also dive in on the unique nature of the spirits industry. Then we will hear from Sean Kennedy, the Executive Vice President, Public Affairs from the National Restaurant Association. And following Sean, we'll hear from Blair Alt, who is the President of the Houston chapter of the United States Bartenders Guild and also a National Brand Ambassador, Brand Manager for Milam and Green Whiskey. So let's jump right in, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Rob Marin to help set up the bar, so to speak, on the current state of play of tariffs and the uniqueness of the spirits industry. Rob, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Christine. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Next slide. As you're aware, the United States is currently imposing a 10% tariff on nearly all imports, including imported spirits, with exceptions for imports from Canada and Mexico if the goods comply with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, and other goods connected to ongoing investigations or other tariffs, such as those related to steel and aluminum. It's important to note that tariffs on imports from China are in a different bucket. Tariffs on imports from China are set at 145% on up, depending on the product. The suspension of the higher country-specific reciprocal tariffs is set to expire on July 9th. We are at a critical juncture. As it's been reported, the U.S. government is negotiating trade agreements with up to 18 countries. It is an ambitious effort that we fully support, opportunities for this administration to address longstanding trade barriers to U.S. spirits exports. We hope that these negotiations will result in untangling distilled spirits from these tariffs with our established markets and open new markets for our exports. We appreciate the Trump administration's early successes in securing a tariff reduction on bottled bourbon in India from 150% to 100%. We hope that the administration builds on this positive momentum by securing additional tariff reductions for all U.S. spirits in India. In terms of tariffs on U.S. spirits, Canada is imposing a 25% tariff, and its provinces have removed U.S. spirits from retail establishments. In addition, Turkey has been imposing a retaliatory tariff on American spirits since 2018. Now it's at 70%. And China is imposing an effective tariff of 160% on U.S. spirits. Next slide, please. The imposition of tariffs on spirits will have far-reaching effects, particularly on the hospitality sector. The spirit sector supports businesses and jobs across communities in every corner of the United States, from the farmers who grow the corn, wheat, rye, and other agricultural inputs, and jobs in fields such as transportation, distribution, bottling, packaging, marketing, and also at small package stores. Our estimates indicate that a 10% tariff on all imported spirits could result in over 28,000 American job losses and nearly $2.4 billion in lost sales. Next slide, please. It's important to note that spirits are high value-added agriculture products supporting farmers across the country. In 2024, the U.S. spirit sector used 2.7 billion pounds of grains in the production of spirits. This is a 134% increase since 2012. Next slide, please. The U.S. spirit sector is the model for fair and reciprocal trade, maintaining a fair and level playing field with 51 countries, including our major trading partners in the spirit sector, the EU, UK, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Australia. And in fact, 86% of our exports go to countries that apply zero tariffs, and 98% of our imports come from those countries that apply zero tariffs on U.S. spirits exports. Securing the permanent return to fair and reciprocal trade in spirits is critical to the long-term health of our sector. We know that tariffs have a negative impact on our exports. For example, between 1997 and June 2018, the US and the EU spirit sectors enjoyed duty-free trade in spirits. However, between 2018 and 2022, when the EU is imposing retaliatory tariffs on certain US spirits exports, total American spirits exports to the EU dropped 20%. Since the tariffs were suspended, American whiskey exports to the EU surged by 60%. And if you take a step back further to 1997, when the US and the EU agreed to eliminate tariffs on distilled spirits, we have seen a 620% increase in US spirits exports to the EU. So fair and reciprocal trade is critical to the growth of our industry. Next slide, please. Finally, it's crucial to recognize that spirits are distinctive products. We are not widgets. What do we mean by this? It means that the production of certain types of spirits, such as bourbon, Tennessee whiskey, cannot move overseas. And the production of such products like tequila, cognac, and Scotch whiskey cannot be onshored. In fact, bourbon is recognized as a distinctive product of the US in 45 countries. This recognition is critical because it protects the integrity of these premium products and ensures their quality and authenticity for consumers in the United States and worldwide. And with that, I'm going to throw it back over to Christine. So thank you for your attention, and we look forward to an insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Now let's turn it over to our next guest speaker, Sean Kennedy, the Executive Vice President for Public Affairs with the National Restaurant Association, to help us get a better understanding of the role of these tariffs will have on the restaurant industry. Before I do that, I have to do a little bit of background on Sean. He's been with the National Restaurant Association since 2019. That's a very interesting time to join the restaurant industry, and I'm sure we could have a cocktail about that at some point, where he is responsible for policy analysis, federal and state advocacy, development and execution of the organization's strategic plan, as well as industry litigation through the Restaurant Law Center. Prior to joining the National Restaurant Association, he worked at the Airlines for America, where he achieved a series of bipartisan legislative victories in Congress. He also previously worked for AT&T, handling federal relations. He's also had roles in government, serving in the White House as Special Assistant to President Obama for Legislative Affairs and as Chief of Staff to former Senator Claire McCaskill. And prior to that, he served several years as a Legislative Director for House Minority Leader Richard Gephardt, too, from my home state of Missouri. So, all right, Sean, so we're going to have a dialogue here, no slides. We're just going to have a chat. And I'm just going to pose some questions to you about the issue at hand. And let's start off with this one. There are a lot of business groups that have expressed concern about the threat of tariffs for imported goods. But restaurants, it seems to me, have sort of a unique exposure here. Can you explain to us how that is, why that is?
Well, first off, Christine, thanks for having me. Thanks for convening this webinar. It's such a critical time, and the leadership of Discus on behalf of your members is fantastic, and we're thrilled to be a partner with you today. You're absolutely right that every business is going to say that they need certainty, that they need predictability, and we understand that. The challenge for the restaurant industry is our business model is very low margins, very low cash on hand. Average restaurants between 4 and 6% profit margin. The average restaurant has between 14 and 16 days of cash available. So when you the chart, the timeline that Rob put out there really makes a lot of restaurant operators throw their hands up and say, should I be trying to attempt to stockpile my spirits and wines? Am I going to have to take items off of the menu? What's the customer reaction going to be? Or even larger issues of saying, is this going to depress customer demand? So the restaurant industry is affected by tariffs the way that every other business is, with higher input costs, but we are much less able to find workarounds for that with such low profit margins, and we're dealing with such a hangover in higher prices post-COVID from an inflationary perspective.
And can you talk a little bit about the uniqueness of spirits? And is it unique in terms of a restaurant's customer traffic on a weekly basis? Like how does that fit in with how the restaurant operates?
When people go out for a meal, certainly for a special occasion, the alcohol and spirits are usually going to be a part of that. And when my wife and I, we have our favorite Mexican place because they really do make the perfect margarita with that perfect tequila that can only be sourced in Mexico. So for the restaurants that serve alcohol and for the bars that rely on alcohol, it's a critical element, and it's not one that can be swapped out. We certainly wouldn't want to have an instance where people see that they can't afford that margarita anymore. That makes them question, well, maybe I shouldn't even attempt. Let's not even go out tonight. Let's stay at home. Let's cook at home, and we'll make our own margarita. We want to make sure that we can meet customer needs, meet customer tastes where they are, and always keep that price as affordable as possible.
Yeah, and I like to think, when I talk to students and that about some of this issue, if you were to open up a restaurant or a bar, we love bourbon, I love bourbon, but I wouldn't have just entirely bourbon on my bar. You would need to have a selection of all the different categories,
Right.
vodka, tequila, rum, Scotch whiskey, Canadian whiskey, etc.
And Christine, as you well know, um, you can't get tequila in the United States. So something that's been very important to President Trump, and we respect it, is President Trump wants to see more domestic production of goods that we currently are importing. And you know better than anybody, Christine, that we export a lot of Kentucky spirits, and we're gonna hear from folks later on that. But there's a lot that we import because simply under law and under standards, we don't make tequila. We don't make Irish whiskey. And so customers know that. So this is not something where there is an immediate, easy solve or fix to correct it. We have to rely on imported goods.
Absolutely. Well said. So I know you mentioned there aren't many things that restaurants can do, but what are any steps that restaurants can take if tariffs are increased further on imported spirits?
Well, it's for the restaurant operators that we're talking to, that look, they're making those economic decisions every single week, every single month. They're looking at their rent, they're looking at their payroll, they're looking at their foods and identifying, do we cut back on a shift? Do we increase the cost of a menu item? Do we take something off the menu to try to simplify it? None of those are good wins for the restaurant consumer. Restaurant diners, they want to see more restaurant investment. They want them making more long-term plans. They want to see an even bigger menu and more choices and better prices. And as our prices increase, it makes it that much harder to do that. And that's why the threat of tariffs and the threat of higher costs on restaurants should be a big concern both to restaurant operators and from the diners that rely on us every week.
Yeah. And to go back to the COVID period, we saw how important, for example, the ability of restaurants to have cocktails to go as part of to help support the revenue stream that was so decimated during COVID because of the lack of diners actually in the restaurant, right? Can you speak to that?
No, it's listen, what the pandemic taught a lot of folks, including policymakers, is that what everybody wants to know, how is this going to affect Main Street of their hometown? And Main Street has got a lot of small businesses on it, but the one that resonates the most with customers is that bar. It's that restaurant. It's that place that folks go to on a Monday, on a Thursday, on a Saturday when they're taking the kids home from soccer, or it's a date night. And there's a reason why during the pandemic, the only two industries that got federal support were restaurants and airlines. And for we'll put aside the airlines for a second, because for restaurants, we're such a hyper local industry, and we have such fantastic ability of hospitality, and we're the number two employer of Americans. So we're really excited about our ability to open our doors every day. And folks were willing to speak out really loudly on the restaurant community to say, we're in trouble right now during the pandemic. I'm not saying we're at that point yet, Christine. I know you're not either. But when you look at the prospect of 150% tariffs on things, it certainly does make a lot of restaurants say, wait, this would have an immediate impact. What's Discus doing? What's the National Restaurant Association doing? And how can I be involved?
Absolutely. So, when we think about, how the industry is, attempting to grow, so how can restaurants, bar owners, and their employees help to support a pro-growth agenda for this industry? You talked about your industry is the number two employer in the United States, which I didn't know. That's fascinating. So how can they be involved in supporting this pro-growth agenda?
Well, I think obviously it's just to make sure that you're heard. I mean, Discus is a fantastic association. Christine, you have an amazing team. I've got an amazing team here on the National Restaurant Association side, just down the street from you. But what makes both of our associations such policy powerhouses here in Washington is the strength of the small businesses that we both are so proud to represent. And when people hear your story and my story, what's equally important is that they're hearing from is that policymakers are hearing from local operators in their districts that say, what Christine talked about, here's what it means to me, and here's how it's going to affect my ability to grow and expand. The same with me from the restaurant side. So one tip, if you're a restaurant operator, is, to join your state restaurant association, which you become a member of the National Restaurant Association. We have a distribution list through restaurantsact.com. To plug my site for just a second, but I think, but you're going to talk about the Toast Not Tariffs Coalition, which we appreciate your leadership on. We're a proud supporter on, just to make sure that people are adding their voices, because Washington's a really noisy town, and every group that has a lobbyist in Washington, from the sock manufacturers to the Sand and Gravel Association to the bookbinders, they're all talking about tariffs. We need to make sure that when people are thinking about policy issues in Washington, they're thinking about restaurants, they're thinking about bars, they're thinking about those wine and spirits producers, and that they're talking to us and making sure that they're maximizing economic plans that will allow for our growth and expansion.
Absolutely. And speaking of, small businesses, the spirits industry has grown in terms of small producers from about a dozen 20 some odd years ago to over 3,100 in every state and the District of Columbia.
And people love it, Christine. And and you see this on Capitol Hill, where members of Congress, they so proudly will display the bottles that are from distillers in their district, and they'll try to, bring them in for receptions and things like that. It is what, when people say, you're going to Houston, you're going to Indianapolis, you're going to Albany, they're always going to say, here's where you need to eat, and here's where you should probably, try. This is the best cocktail that we make.
Yep.
And it's part of the fabric of America. And what we love is that elected officials get it. I see Blair just coming on right now. People get it. And that's what is so fantastic about the power of our voice when we finally, when we engage.
Absolutely. And we appreciate our partnership and work with you and your team, Sean, over the years on this issue and others. So one final question. So if you could deliver one message to the administration on tariffs on behalf of restaurants, what would it be?
I think number one, as Rob said, we support what President Trump wants to achieve. It's important as a consumer. I want to see us have the best trade agreements with our foreign partners. For the restaurant industry, for the distilled spirits folks, distilled spirits is actually probably the best model for what free trade is, because so much of what we import, zero tariffs. So much of what we export, or you export, zero tariffs. That's great for not only your members on the discus side, but the restaurants that are buying and selling those products. We need an exemption. We are not part of the problem. We're absolutely part of the solution. We want to continue to work constructively with the Trump administration to echo that fact.
Absolutely. We are the export success story, really. The fact that tariffs were lifted however many years ago really set us off for a tremendous growth trajectory. And we are the model, as you said and Rob said, for what fair and reciprocal trade can be and what it should be. Well, thank you so much, Sean. We're going to come back
Thanks,
to you,
Christine.
but right now we're gonna invite Blair Alt to join me for the next part of our discussion. Blair is a Houston native, and she is currently serving as president of the Houston chapter of the United States Bartenders Guild. Blair has spent a decade bartending at some of Houston's famed whiskey and pinball venues, and I will need to go to some of these places the next time I go to Houston, such as Little Dipper and Poison Girl, before becoming one of the few women to catapult Milam and Green whiskey into the national spotlight. She is also currently their national brand ambassador. Apologies if I mispronounced the name of the whiskey.
It's Milam.
Milam, I'm sorry.
Milam.
I'll get that right. Sorry.
No worries.
She is the former co-host and producer of the Whiskey Women podcast, current producer of Grown Up Storytime, and she also has a master's degree from the University of Washington. So welcome, Blair, to this discussion. Happy to have you here.
I am so happy to be here. This conversation could not be happening I'm just happy we're having it right now, because it is definitely I keep saying I've been having conversations about tariffs for since this webinar was announced, and especially in the last 24 hours. So just happy to be here.
Great. Well, let's get to it. So first of all, could you tell us a little bit about the chapter of the U.S. Bartenders Guild? Who do you represent? What are you hearing from there now? And what are they most concerned about?
Yeah. So the United States Bartenders Guild, generally as a national organization, has pockets, chapters all over of its bartenders, but it's also people who are enthusiasts. It's people who own bars. It's brand ambassadors. I was a bartender turned brand ambassador. It's like a pipeline situation. And we meet as a chapter to educate ourselves, but also to form communities, because honestly, the hospitality industry is not one that has a lot of infrastructure in the way that other industries do to take care of themselves. So our chapter, even though we are a smaller chapter now after the pandemic, we are shrunk a little bit under 50, but we meet together still for education, for support groups, for connecting our members with resources. I mean, we're trying to do our best to fill any hole that needs to be filled. So
thank you. So what are they most concerned about in these?
So economic uncertainty in general I know that during the pandemic we had frontline workers, our nurses, everyone in the hospital, but truly in economic instability, I like to say it's the bartender is the front line, because even just when you raise a price by 25 cents, well, if the gratuity was always $1 before, now it's 75 cents, that's 25% reduction in what you're taking in on even individual things. And that's been happening as coffee costs have already risen. This is already happening, not just with spirits industry, but just hospitality in general. So it's gonna be a tough one, and it's very tough. The biggest concerns, other than what is my vocation going to look like in the future, you're also just seeing people we just got through the pandemic. The bars down in downtown Houston, they were thriving right before the pandemic. They are just now coming back, and to have any sort of impact it means we are seeing bars close that really could be thriving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so your experience working as a bartender, an educator, and a brand ambassador, coming back to the specifics of tariffs, how do you explain the impact of tariffs to those who may not follow it as closely as we do and as you have in recent times?
So I have the a strange background of being a educator as well as a bartender, and so I was actually an economics teacher the 2017 to 2018 school year. In a little suburb of Houston. So my favorite way to explain tariffs is that tariffs are a fee that is completely based on where a product is made. And so that identity of the product truly means that if you're charging a fee based on that, it's a political tool, and there's no fee that's being charged, because it's using resources or anything like that. So it's just a political tax, honestly.
Yeah. So, your work as the chapter head in Houston, do you have any stories? Like, what are you hearing from your members about specifically, whether or not these tariffs are impacting them, or if they're concerned about them impacting in the future?
Yeah, so because of course everyone understands that the true impact of all this uncertainty and tariffs is to come, right? It's not necessarily something that can be seen right now, especially as everyone has inventory that was based on pricing before the tariffs. We understand that this is, however, truly being in Texas, where we were talking about margaritas. I mean, that is truly, I think, the national cocktail of Texas. It could be an old fashioned, but we're working on it. But tequila, actually, Houston Watch Company keeps excellent records. I have to give it to them as a librarian. Fantastic records, and they already saw last Wednesday that their El Tesoro Reposado had jumped 28% in price, from like 45 to 50 something. And so I was like, oh, so he's like, so even though this is a small red flag, it is of what's to come.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think you had mentioned briefly too, about sort of the pathway of a bartender and their career, and certainly looking for more long-term stability. So will tariffs have any impact on that in terms of the career path of bartenders?
I mean, honestly, the pipeline is going to be affected because we have lots of international brands that are looking for bartenders to hire to talk about their brands. I mean, the bottles, new brands, especially. I mean, I can attest, being a Mile and Green ambassador, new brands really are sold by bartenders. They only go so far in storytelling when you're in a store tasting. There has to be a partnership between the on-premise and the supplier for the marketing and for the community building. And so with when we have international brands that are now not able to come or really not make it work, that's a whole line of income for bartenders that's not going to be available, as well as the brand money is not being spent at their bars to drive that community and all that activation. So yes, we are not looking forward to that at all.
That's a very interesting, very specific real world example. I've been in this industry a long time, but, putting it like that helps us to sort of really understand and contextualize, from a practical standpoint, how some of these things could impact, people that hold jobs as bartenders. Um, so, and at just that point too, I think, bartenders are kind of, as you said, on the front line. So I can, many instances where I would go to a bar and ask for a recommendation, and that bartender is the one to say, let me show you this. Have you tried this? And so,
Turns out we still like to be sold directly by humans. Like, we
yes,
actually do prefer that generally.
yes,
So yeah.
yes. So they do play a very important role in, showcasing new brands to customers. So that's a really important thing to note. Um, so what would you say to someone who, might think that tariffs only impact the foreign company that is producing the product and has no impact on kind of their favorite neighborhood bar?
Well, I would challenge them to make their margarita at home and try to, it's truly cocktails. If anything, this is going to be the silver lining from the situation. It's, in my opinion, was also a silver lining from the pandemic, where you just see a lot of people understanding the amount of effort and becoming more educated as well as to where their spirits are coming from, where their beverages are coming from. So if education truly could be the thing that we get more of because we learn about as things are personally impacting us. But that's my hope actually, is that if you walk into your neighborhood bar and you're starting to see that back bar impacted by tariffs, then now you understand it. You'll see it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Sean. What is the one thing you would want policymakers to know about the bartending industry in Houston right now, and if that relates to tariffs or not? But what was the one thing you would want them to know?
Just that the hospitality industry is the connective tissue of all of the industries in Texas, and that when you don't take care of the hospitality workers, either by shoring up those systems for healthcare and for economic stability, it starts eroding everything. So, every industry has to have a party some point during the year. How are we going to do that if you don't take care of us?
Mhm. And a way to do that, of course, is to address the issue with tariffs.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Blair. So we're gonna transition now to a Q&A. But while you all are getting your questions together for our great panel, wanted to come back to Sean and something we talked about earlier. If any of you are concerned about this topic, let's discuss how you can make your voice heard. So let me go back to Sean for a minute. And the lessons that we've learned about advocacy in a post-pandemic world. So, Sean, do you want to share how people can take action and lend their voice?
I mean, thanks. I mean, it just goes back to what we said. It's Discus and the National Restaurant Association. We've got the best facts. We've got the economists. We can present. What we can't give is the story about what it means at the local level. And when you add your name to petitions like this, when you engage through Discus, or if you're a restaurant owner through your state restaurant association, you're reminding Congress and the White House of just how local your business is and what you're doing to your local economy and why they need to be paying attention to this issue. Everybody gets asked all the time to do these petitions. I know that it's a pain, but it's the most effective way for us to get our message out there and to say this is what we represent when we were out there walking through the halls of Congress and meeting with administration officials.
Thanks. And I think we put the link in the chat if anyone is interested in signing up. Just a brief advertisement about the Toast Not Tariffs Coalition, which Sean has mentioned a few times now. That is a coalition of 57 national and state level associations that have joined in the effort in opposition to tariffs on spirits and wine. It includes the entire 3 tiers of the beverage alcohol industry. Our colleagues in the wine industry are participating, the wholesalers, our retailer partners, the U.S. Bartenders Guild, of course, and several state guilds representing either spirits or wine, and many others. So this is a coalition that gives a unified voice specific to tariffs on spirits and wine. And if you have any interest in that, you can go to the website to learn more about what the Toast Not Tariffs Coalition has been up to and how we are amplifying our voice on this issue. So now I will transition, and Rob, I think Rob has the job of culling through all the questions and starting the Q&A session.
Yes, thank you, Christine, and thanks for everyone who's submitted comments through the Q&A option through Zoom. So I'm going to try and combine some questions together and try and direct them to the most appropriate of the panelists. So the first one is for Sean, but Blair, I think this is also applicable to bars. So the first question is a two-parter. Have you already started to see price increases in bars and restaurants as a result of tariffs? And related to that, have you already started to see a slowing in business since these tariffs were announced? So maybe start with you, Sean, and then Blair.
Sure.
Love to hear from you too.
From a quantifiable perspective, restaurant menu prices, there isn't so far a menu prices do continue to go up. I mean, overall, our labor costs are up about 40%. Our food costs are up about 35%. Menu prices have only gone up 30%. This is since the pandemic. So, what restaurants are going to try to do is they're only going to raise prices as the absolute last possible alternative. It means that they're going to do less investment, employ less people, do less offerings, none of which are good for consumers. As far as is there a decrease in consumer spending? We're still waiting for that data that came in. I know, Rob, you were looking at the same numbers that came out to the economic numbers that came out today that did show that the economy is not growing at the pace that was hoped. There is some consumer uncertainty right now. We want to minimize that uncertainty translating into let's eat at home, let's not go out. So anecdotally, we are starting to see some softening, but it's not turned into anything meaningful yet. But this is still very early in the process.
Yeah, I would agree that especially since Houston has had we've had some great basketball recently that there hasn't been as much. I would say we're not seeing it yet, but the little red flags are there, at least in terms of what costs are starting to increase. And I will say outside of Houston, yes, we have reports of just fruit costs, especially because Texas being close to Mexico, everything is increasing, and that means people are hiring less, and also, again, brands are spending less on their activations.
Thank you for that. And maybe we'll keep the next one with you, Sean, and Blair. And Sean, you kind of touched upon this in some of your remarks. What are some concrete and actionable things, bars and restaurants can do at this time to mitigate the short and long-term impact of tariffs?
Um, Look, there's sort of two ways. One is what should they be doing as businesses? And it obviously it's getting a better grip. And this applies not only to the tariffs on spirits, but on everything from the furniture that you're importing that may be from China or what you're stocking your kitchen with. But it's really to get a better understanding through your supplier of your supply chain, identify where those imports are coming from, identify what the tariffs are, and if there are other alternatives. That's a tall order for a lot of restaurant operators that just don't have the wherewithal to work through that. But if you're importing a lot of shrimp from Vietnam, now's the time for you to be reassessing if there are other sources, if there are other ways of going about it. From an advocacy perspective, it's really just to make sure that your elected officials at every level are hearing about the impact that tariffs or just that the economic conditions are having for an industry that is, again, unlike, you're hearing about tech companies that are importing plane loads of product to try to beat out the tariffs. Blair doesn't have access to a plane probably or a warehouse to store all that product. And most restaurants are doing the same thing. We are constantly importing new product. So when our prices go up, there are very few hedges that restaurants have. And so it's making sure that people recognize, elected officials recognize the really fragile ecosystem that every restaurant operator goes through every month, every bar goes through every month when they're paying their bills.
Yeah, I would have to just there's definitely already people are starting to make assessments of their inventory and just and again, they're not they know that the impact isn't quite going to come until they go through the inventory they currently have.
Right.
But especially when you're looking at cocktail placements, all of that, you're having to reassess and really limit your ability to serve your customers the way they might want to, because you're just going to have to find the cost cutting elsewhere.
Right.
So.
And I'm actually building on this. A related question came through the chat. This might be a little bit more relevant for our colleagues in the wholesaler tier of the beverage alcohol sector. But building on what you guys were talking about, generally how many days inventory do bars and restaurants have for products? We'll build up beyond just spirits, but in the case of restaurants and a lot of bars have, food offerings too, like how long of an inventory do you have right now?
I'll let you. You want to take a shot at that first, Blair, from your perspective?
I mean, ideally, they have a very fresh inventory. But no, I think generally people, it's going to be about 90 days before we are really feeling, you were really starting to see menus change. And because it's also just anticipating what costs might go up.
Yeah, on the restaurant side, look on the foodstuffs, proteins, and produce, those are perishable. So you're going to measure that time in weeks. I agree with Blair that for spirits and wine, it's going to be probably many weeks slash months. But there are some, there are certainly restaurants here in DC that I frequent, and they've got their distributors coming in once a week because they've got that kind of volume or they don't have that level of storage. So it is, again, we're on the very early stages of this right now, but restaurants are really treating this as something to watch.
Great, thank you for that. And we've had a number of, I would say, some technical questions related to tariffs and spirit sector. So I'm going to come at you, Christine, with a few questions, and I'll chime in here too.
Okay.
Talking about tequila and USMCA eligible. So as a general rule, are all tequilas meeting the rules of origin in the USMCA? And how do you go about um, complying with that as you're importing products so you don't get hit with the extra tariffs? 25% in the case of Canada and Mexico.
So if it's imported under USMCA and you check that box, right, when you're importing it, it should meet the USMCA requirements, right, for being imported and not be subjected to that 25% tariff. The US has a very robust and effective regulatory system for the importation of distilled spirits worldwide. Our regulatory agency, which is under the Department of Treasury, the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, every label has to be approved by that agency. So there is a robust process in place to ensure that, for example, when tequila is coming from Mexico, it has met the standards for the production of that product in Mexico. We won't bore you with all the details about all the requirements and what TTB does to verify that, but rest assured, this is why distinctive product recognition is so important, because rest assured, if you're a consumer in the United States and you're buying tequila, it has gone through that robust regulatory process to ensure that, it is coming from Mexico and meeting their very strict standards for the production of tequila.
One more question for you, Christine. What is the status of tariffs on single malt scotch, recognizing that the US has agreed to suspend tariffs? We have somebody here who knows their stuff a little bit here, another fellow tariff nerd, that the US agreed to suspend tariffs in the WTO large civil aircraft dispute. So what is how is single malt scotch being treated right now under the tariff
I'm
regime?
going to let you, the tariff nerd, answer that question.
All right, well then I'm going to take a few here and just go through a bunch pretty quickly. So right now, single malt scotch and all spirits from the UK are facing that 10% tariff. There's a whole nother set of disputes that we didn't include in the slides, but yes, there is the large civil aircraft dispute where the US, EU, and UK have imposed tariffs on a range of spirits, and they agreed under the Biden administration to suspend them until July 2026. But the current actions by the Trump administration and the 10% universal and reciprocal tariffs have kind of superseded that. Had a question about Canada, understanding why the federal government in Canada imposed tariffs on all US beverage alcohol products, but why were the products removed from the shelves in all the provinces? And the answer to that is or our understanding is that it was a political posturing by the premiers. So think governors in the provinces of Canada in the lead up to yesterday's election for prime minister. I know many of you on this webinar are very familiar with the structure of the US beverage alcohol system, and all the provinces in Canada to some extent are, think of a controlled state. So for those of you in Virginia, and the premiers, the governors of those provinces use their authority and powers to remove U.S. beverage alcohol products from the shelves of their provincial stores as a form of retaliation in response to the U.S. Tariffs on Canadian products. Maybe we'll go back to Sean and to Blair on this question. Around how many jobs does the U.S. Restaurant and bar industry support?
So, sorry, Rob.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, there are roughly 1 million restaurants, food service venues in the United States employing between 15 and 18 million people. That doesn't, that's direct. And then you can do indirect and you can go, it expands much farther. The companies, the tradespeople that support it, the cleaning folks, the suppliers, the bakers, et cetera. But the number that we're giving is again, second largest employer. First is healthcare. And one thing, and if I can jump to one thing, Rob, what we appreciate about, you've answered, I agree with you're definitely got in the tariff nerd category, but the challenge that you have as a tariff nerd is you have to hit reload every day to see what the latest announcement is. So the challenge that all of us have, Christine and her members, and certainly what Blair has to do is we've had tariffs threatened, then removed. The threat was removed. We've had threats reimposed and then suspended. So all we can offer when I talked about predictability and certainty, Blair has none of that because Blair can basically plan 2 weeks in advance right now, and if she does beyond 2 weeks, that's on her. And there was a wine bar operator I was talking to that just opened up, just signed a lease 1 year from now. To open 1 year from now, and she hasn't imported furniture. She hasn't begun to import stock, and she's making real decisions now, trying to do that speculation. So, on the predictability part, that's really what is hurting the restaurant industry, and I suspect the distilled spirits folks as well. It's just very difficult when you've got these low profit margins and low cash on hand to make 6-month, 9-month, 18-month decisions, Rob. And your answer is you're everything you're hitting is spot on, but you're operating under, you're only as good as today's information, and it's tough when it's evolving so quickly.
So there was actually a question related to that in the chat. And maybe, pivot it and turn it to Christine, because Sean partially answered it. Christine, what is the best way to stay on top of all the breaking news on tariffs?
Wow. Well, it is difficult to stay on top of it sometimes. You see our timeline that attempts to track it to the best of our knowledge. I think, Discus, Rob leads our efforts to track this and get this information out to our members in a very timely manner. We also share this information with the Toast Not Tariffs Coalition. So we share it with our members and we share it with the coalition so that everybody is getting the information in a timely manner. And then sometimes, things are said, but you have to follow it up with, the actual official documentation too. So sometimes things are just said, but it isn't followed through on, or, the position changes. So we make sure that we're very careful when we are sharing information about tariff developments, that we are utilizing the actual text of the executive order so that we can, provide as much clarity as we can to our members so that they understand, when the new tariff will be lifted or imposed and on what products and at what time, and all those sorts of details that are really important for companies to know if, to adjust to the changing environment.
One more question for you, Christine. Why are wines and spirits being targeted in these disputes for, as targets for retaliatory tariffs? What are some of the reasons why governments might focus on these iconic maybe that's giving away the answer a little
Yeah.
bit, but on these iconic products.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it does kind of go back to, when some of the disputes that the spirits industry was embroiled in, particularly with the EU on steel and aluminum back in 2018, 2019. It's, the European Union decided to select products that are, iconically American and associated with America. So we weren't the only ones, right? But we were certainly in that bucket along with other products like Levi's jeans and Harley Davidson and other things that were particularly identified. At that time, I think, some of it was related to maybe the misbelief that, bourbon only comes from Kentucky. Bourbon can be made anywhere in the United States under US law. So I think, initially bourbon may have been targeted because of, the belief that, it only comes from Kentucky. A lot of it comes from Kentucky, but it doesn't have to come from Kentucky in order to be labeled as a bourbon.
And for Sean and Blair, and for Christine too, maybe you can all chime in on this. Let's say we get to July 9th and let's say there are no agreements with our major trading partners, and that suspension expires and tariffs on imported products from the EU increases to 20%. We see an increase on, Japanese whiskey is a big category. We see that increase, I think, to 24%. And then all the other products that, we're bringing in from other countries whose additional tariffs I don't have memorized, but are pretty high. What is the outlook post July 9th if all of those reciprocal tariffs are imposed?
Sean, do you want to start, Sean, about,
Well,
the
I
impact
just it
on the
just
restaurant?
look, restaurants we're gonna bob and weave and do what we can to keep our doors open. But every month that a lot of for every month for a lot of restaurants, every month that they keep their doors open is a bit of a blessing, and meaning that it's tough times. So it certainly makes a difficult situation for the average restaurant that much more difficult. We're not ready to say that there is going to be mass closure of restaurants or that cocktail prices will skyrocket, but it's going to put unsustainable pressure on the least profitable business on Main Street. And they're going to do what they can, but the options are not good for the community. They're not good for the servers, and they're not good for the customers.
Mhm. And I think, from a discus perspective, we'll just continue to make our case for why, the spirits industry is unique, our integral part of the hospitality industry, and, supporting everything that Sean said about the impact within the hospitality industry. But noting again, to come back to how we all started this by saying, of course, we fully support the administration's goals of supporting jobs and manufacturing in the United States, but we're different. We can't make some of these things here. And some of that recognition goes back to our federal governments, making those formal agreements with trading partners that are going back decades and decades. The first distinctive product recognition for bourbon goes all the way back to 1971 between the United States and France. So, even back then it was recognized, how important it is to provide this formal recognition to ensure that, cognac has to come from France, bourbon has to come from the United States. So continuing to make that case and explain, again, we are the model for fair and reciprocal trade. It has worked tremendously well for us. We want to get back to that, and we want to work with the administration, as we've said, on opening up markets where we have significant barriers. We do. So we want to, expand that list of 51 countries to even more where we have duty-free access. It will only help support more U.S. jobs in the United States to open up more markets for U.S. spirits exports.
And honestly, even as the USBG needs to start empowering bartenders to be kind of a first educators about this. I mean, our country was built in bars. Truly, I believe this. This is my favorite thing to say about American history. We were built in the public house, and so it can be a first education stop point to just point to people out like this is how a tariff impacts you today.
All right, we have a few minutes left here. There's a lot of, I would say, some very specific questions in here in the chat. I'll try and answer a few of them very quickly. There's one question, somebody who's following the trade negotiations very closely, a question, and Christine, feel free to chime in on this. Is it correct that the executive branch, so the president, cannot lower the most favored nation tariffs without approval by Congress? So that is correct. So that's why in these negotiations right now, I mean, my understanding is that the tariff increases are, the negotiation is the leverage that the administration is using. If they do want to lower the most favored nation tariff, so that's the US, thinking very simply, our regular tariff, they would need to go to Congress, for that. So that's why they are not at this time planning to do that. Hold on. There's a lot of questions about how to get involved, and I think Sean and Christine, you guys did a great job doing that. Maybe we'll open up to any final remarks by Sean, Blair, and Christine.
Well, again, I'll just say thank you to Team Discus for convening this group on behalf of the industry. We appreciate the National Restaurant Association appreciates the partnership, and we get it. It's really tough right now. Restaurant operators have got a lot going on, and to spend the time and join us on a webinar is not always the most fun thing to do. But these are challenging times. This is a challenging industry, but what we have all been able to demonstrate since the pandemic is that people appreciate restaurants and bars and the alcohol makers, the spirits makers that stock our shelves. They want to see more of it. And it's just a question of us staying consistent, staying on that message, and pushing forward to bring the industry to an even better place.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sean. Blair?
Just that it is fantastic that we're having this conversation before real impact starts to shake things to their core. But that uncertainty really is the fun killer. And if the only thing that we can get out of this is educating ourselves, then that is the best hope. But truly, hopefully we can all I'm just going to use this QR code right now. That's what I'm going to do.
Thank you, Blair. So if today's discussion resonated with you, if you felt the impact or you're concerned about the impact for your bar, your business, your community, please add your voice to our petition. We appreciate you joining. And one last plug here, if we can go to the next slide. Our Ask the Expert series will resume in mid-May. So these are the topics coming up. Please take note of that. If you are interested, we'll be getting more information about these two webinars in the coming days and weeks. Thank you all for joining us for this really important discussion. We appreciate your time. Hopefully you all did this with a cocktail in hand. If not, hopefully this evening you will take time to go to your local restaurant, order your favorite cocktail, sit down and have a chat with your favorite bartender. It's those engagements that really help us all through some challenging times and help support your local business in the process. Thanks all for joining. Have a good afternoon.